Good evening. Welcome to the Minnesota Zoo and the Our World Speaker Series. We're happy to have you join us tonight. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, which provides funding to make this event free to all who attend. My name is Becky Duchild. I'm an aquarist here at the Minnesota Zoo. And I'm going to be introducing the real speaker tonight, but I have a little bit of information for you to begin with. To allow for wider access for the presentation, we offer live captioning with an emphasis on live. Our captioner is typing as I speak, having no idea what is going to be said next. So we ask in advance for your understanding when words may be incorrect. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my work with Nautilus before I introduce you to Dr. Barord. So I've been an aquarist for the last, a professional aquarist for the last 18 years, almost 16 of which have been spent here at the Minnesota Zoo. I've been fortunate enough to work with a large variety of cephalopods in my time here, and I'll explain what those are momentarily. I had a brief experience working with Nautilus at the very beginning of my career, which kind of opened my eyes to cephalopods. I will say that my very favorite are octopus. Those are awesome. Followed by cuttlefish, and Nautilus are equally as amazing. Just incredible creatures, and I hope that you walk away from our presentation tonight feeling the exact same way. My introduction with Dr. Barord came at a regional aquatics workshop. It's the largest professional aquarium workshop in the country, now even internationally. We met at Virginia Beach in 2011 at the conference at that time and began a lot of conversations really revolving around our mutual love of cephalopods. Now here at the Minnesota Zoo, once I got back, I wanted to participate in a program that has quickly become one of my very favorite things about working here at the zoo, and that's our Ulysses S. Seal Conservation Grant Program. It's a grant program that basically tells anybody here at the zoo, no matter what your job is, if you want to participate in a conservation program anywhere in the world, the zoo is going to help you do that. And so in my conversations with Greg, years and years ago, it really solidified my desire to help him with his research with Nautilus and his Save the Nautilus program. So with the help of the Minnesota Zoo and our conservation grant program, I've been fortunate enough to help donate to the Save the Nautilus program quite a lot of money. In 2012, the zoo donated $2,500 to sponsor a trip to the Philippines. In 2014, they sponsored another $2,500 for Greg's research in Papua New Guinea. In 2016, the zoo sponsored another $2,500 to help fund research in Palau. And just this year, last year, a few months ago, the zoo gave another $2,500 to Greg to help with his upcoming trip to Fiji and Samoa this coming summer. So I feel very fortunate enough that the zoo has given me an opportunity to help fund Greg's research and really help save the Nautilus and protect Nautilus all around the world. So one of my very favorite parts of the job here, and I'm so very grateful for the zoo to help make that happen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Greg and then give you a little intro to what a Nautilus actually is. So Dr. Greg Barord attended Texas A&M University at Galveston and City University of New York, Brooklyn College and Graduate Center, where he obtained his Ph.D. He has worked at the National Resource Center for Cephalopods, the aquarium at Moody Gardens, and even spent a couple of years working on commercial fishing boats in the Bering Sea. While he has worked with a variety of different marine species, his passion is cephalopods, and in particular, nautiluses. He is currently the marine biology instructor at Central Campus in Des Moines, a unique career-based high school where students have the chance to participate in his ongoing research and, of course, learn about nautiluses. Greg is also a conservation biologist with Save the Nautilus, a nonprofit organization founded by two 11-year-old kids aimed at promoting awareness, education, and research on Nautilus conservation. He's also active with local, national, and international educational outreach efforts and serves as an advisor on several conservation-related organizations. So you're going to be hearing from Dr. Barord here very, very shortly, or in fact now. You're up first.
Thanks, Becky. So you did hear that right. My two bosses are two 11-year-olds, and I'm a marine biologist in Iowa. I scratch my head at that every single day I show up to work, but it's an amazing facility. It's a little tiny aquarium that the students run weekends, summers, holidays, and there's lots of different organisms there. Billions and billions of years ago, there was some boring stuff. I'm not sure if there's any biologists or any cell biologists. That's pretty much all there was. So it's not until almost 500 million years ago that you see coral reefs form in the oceans and you really see life kind of pick up. Almost 500 years ago in the fossil record, you see the nautiloid lineage pop up and start its diversification forward. So as we travel through time, we're going to see some animals you're familiar with. You're going to see some mass extinctions, but I hope what you start to see is that the one kind of constant thing in the oceans are nautiluses. Certain animals are here for a short time, like dinosaurs, and they get wiped out by extinctions. But that little energizer nautilus is still kind of hanging around through all this time, until we get kind of recently. So we have these animals pop up 200,000 years ago, and what they're doing is just overusing habitat animals and causing lots of extinction. And that's kind of what we think is going on with nautiluses. And to get the depressing part out of the way now, so these are all the animals that we know that humans have caused to become extinct because of either overfishing, overhunting, habitat destruction, just any human-based cause for wiping these animals out. And these are just the ones that we know about. You know, this doesn't say the ones that are in rainforests or in coral reefs that we destroy that we don't even know, we haven't even discovered. But I think the alarming thing is the year. Because nothing's really changed. You know, we're actually getting better at seeing what animals are extinct now because of us. And this just continues, it continues and continues. And that vaquita we'll come back to at the end. But our main question here, you know, if we were to give this talk 20 years from now, is the nautilus going to have a year up there? And I'm going to pass it back to Becky.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on what exactly is a nautilus. Something you probably have not seen a living animal, but you've most definitely seen the shell. And we really want to introduce you to what the living animal is so you have more appreciation for the shells you see on, in stores. So that guy there, that's a nautilus. That's an octopus. Cuttlefish, or squid cuttlefish. So this makes up the class Cephalopoda. So these are all kind of related animals. They all came from a common ancestor. But they are a bit different. So we've got the coleoids and the nautiloids. Coleoids are the octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Nautiloids are the nautilus and the allonautilus. So some of the major differences between the groups. So the coleoids contain chromatophores. Their skin is lined with chromatophores, and these are the color-changing cells that allow them to do rapid color changes. You've probably seen that on, especially octopus or cuttlefish at zoos and aquariums. Really rapid color change to help them camouflage. Nautiloids do not have those. Coleoids have complex eyes. In fact, cuttlefish eyes have been used in research even for human conditions such as cataracts. Nautiloids have very simple eyes. There's that word I can't pronounce. Semmelparous. That's it. I can't remember where the emphasis goes. So basically that means with octopus, squid, and cuttlefish, they're having one reproductive episode before death. So octopus are going to breed once, she's going to lay eggs, and then her lifespan is quickly over. Nautiloids are iteroparous, so they're going to have multiple breeding episodes through their entire life. The coleoids, no external shell. Nautiloids have retained their shell, much like their common ancestors. Octopus, squid, and cuttlefish have ink sacs, and this is what they use for protection when they're being preyed upon or hunted by a predator, they're going to squirt out ink, and that will allow them to confuse the predator and kind of jet off in the opposite direction. Nautilus do not have that. Octopus, squid, and cuttlefish have an R-selected life strategy. Basically what that means is they have a high growth rate. They're reaching their maximum size rather rapidly. They'll have many offspring. They'll lay many, many eggs, most of which won't survive. And then they have a short lifespan. So even like the giant Pacific octopus that has like that 10-foot arm span, they're only going to live probably 4 to 5 years at most. So most of them are going to have a very, very short lifespan. Nautiloids are very different. They have a slow growth rate, so very long amount of time in between when they're hatched to when they're fully grown. They'll have fewer offspring. Most of those will hopefully survive to adulthood, more invested in them, and a longer life expectancy. A good example of this K-selected life strategy would be something like an elephant that can live very, very long times, producing very few young, but those young are surviving. So this is what a nautilus looks like. You're going to see a lot cool video and stuff tonight to show you a bit better how they move and what they do, but just to give you a quick overview of what you're looking at, they do have an eye. Let's see, right there. It's a pretty, not very often seen in nature. It's a very well-developed eye for an eye that does not have a lens. So they're not going to see detailed pictures, they are going to make out basic shapes. They have cirri or tentacles, all of these. Most of the research says they can have upwards of 90 tentacles. They are suckerless, so very different from the squid and octopus and cuttlefish that do contain suckers. These are ridged, so they're going to grab a hold of things rather quickly and kind of engulf them with these ridged tentacles and hang on to things that way. The umbilicus is just kind of the meeting or the whorl of the shell here, so that's kind of where it comes to a point, a conical shape in the middle there. And then they have a hood, which is this structure here. So nautiloids are able to retract fully back into their shells, and they just kind of slam that hood shut, and that will protect kind of all of their soft parts inside of that hard shell. And that's what the inside looks like. Very, very cool structure. Very relevant in the mathematical world, in fact. So what you're seeing is, so each of these, the chambered nautilus obviously have chambers, and an adult can have upwards of about 36 chambers, and they grow throughout their lifespan. So the nautilus itself is going to occupy kind of the outermost chamber. And so as they grow, they form these septums. So the septum will form right behind the animal as it kind of moves around the shell. Each of the chambers is connected by the siphuncle, and it's a tube-like structure that helps to pass gases and water through the chambers, and this is the primary way that they regulate their buoyancy. And then this X-ray gives you a nice view of their beak as well. And this is something that's common with the coleoids as well. They do have a parrot-like beak. It's actually 2 parts. Works much like you would see on a parrot. And then inside their mouth is a very cool structure called a radula, which is basically a tooth-covered tongue. So if you can imagine next time you're eating your hamburger or cheeseburger or something, you're using a tooth-covered tongue. That's what they do to eat. It's a very, very cool adaptation. All right, so there are 2 genera of nautilus. There's the nautilus and then there's the alonautilus. And so if you take a good look at these pictures here, these 4, this is the same species of nautilus, but you can see a very different striping patterns in them. So there's a lot of differences in between individual regions and even individual nautiluses. And then this really funny looking guy over here is the fuzzy nautilus or the alonautilus, and Greg will talk about them in a little bit. So all of the nautilus are found in the Indo-Pacific region of our globe, so it's going to be kind of borderline Southeast Asia down to Australia and all of the Philippines and all of the island chains throughout there, and that's primarily where, well, that's the only places you're going to find nautilus. Nautilus are bound by a couple of habitat constraints. strict habitat constraints. So they're upwards of about 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't survive above that temperature. They also are not going to survive below about 800 meters, and that's their implosion limit. So once they descend down there, the ocean depths are too strong for them to osmoregulate, and they will implode. So they're going to be found on these reef slopes, and they're going to make kind of vertical migrations, and some more horizontal migrations, but really kind of bound into the habitat that you'll find them in. They also don't spend a ton of time kind of drifting around in this mid-water area. That's where the predators sit. So they're going to avoid predation by really hanging out kind of closer down to the bottom. So this brings up kind of one of the reasons that you'll find out a little bit later that their populations are really kind of having difficulty. They're really kind of stuck, bound by that upper temperature limit, that lower implosion limit, and then the islands that they inhabit, these coral reef slopes, are really kind of locking them into place. Now this is bad for something like genetic drift. So basically, within a population, you want to have animals exchanging genes to kind of maintain this high gene population. They're not getting that because they're not migratory, or they're not migrating into these different populations. It also means that when the traders go out looking for nautilus and they're out to collect nautilus shells, they're going to find a population of nautilus and they're going to hunt that population of nautilus to extinction. Now you're not going to see nautilus coming in from other populations to replenish that. And then the traders are eventually going to find another population and decimate that, and then find another population and decimate that. So they're not coming back and kind of refilling into the niches that were lost when the people went in and fished them. Now a little bit about their buoyancy. It's not like a submarine. It's not going to be where these guys kind of contain gas and it's trapped in there. And it's not going to be like a fish. Fish have swim bladders. They can regulate their buoyancy up and down through their swim bladder. If you're a scuba diver, they work a lot like a scuba diver. So they're going to maintain their neutral buoyancy. That's what they're really looking for. And they do that with that siphuncle, which is the tube that goes through the chambers of the Nautilus. Now, it was initially thought that Nautilus had a day-night cycle, basically, that they would be down at depth during the day, they would come up for food at night, and they would descend back down during the day. But more recent research has suggested that they're actually all over the place. So they're kind of traveling all over the place. Again, not spending a ton of time in that mid-water level, because that's where the predators are going to be, but they're kind of occupying kind of in between those temperature depths and implosion depths. And at this point, you now know what a nautilus basically is. And so I'm going to turn it over to Greg, and he's going to give you the most interesting information on nautilus.
Thanks. And so I think this is also the part where we as people, scientists, we think we know a lot about nautiluses, but then we realize we don't know anything. And this is a really good example. Another good example is something about what do nautiluses eat in the wild. Seems like an easy question for any animal, but until recently we didn't even know how they found food. So this is how we think they find food. This is in Australia from 2012. We think they kind of search around in that deep, dark ocean, 300-400 meters deep, about 1,200 feet, and they're going shell first, just sensing the prey. Nautiluses have the largest olfactory organ, or nose, in the animal kingdom as an invertebrate. So when they really hone in on it, for me it would be a really big bean burrito. When I know I'm close to a bean burrito, I'm going to outstretch my arms, my mouth might open, my tongue's going to stick out, I'm going to go for it. Same thing with the nautilus. When it's moving around shell first, when it knows that rotting piece of flesh is there, it kind of scoots forward with those tentacles, moves them out, and just searches. So this is in complete darkness, so they can't see very well. So that's why they're using those tentacles to find where that food is. Now when they're searching for tentacles, there's also going to be predators. So this is also in Australia. These are two big groupers. And we're not really sure what's going on here, but we think it's going to be cool. Another kind of easy question that we didn't even know. You know, what eats Nautilus? Where do Nautilus lie in the whole ecosystem of the deep sea? So we can say that, at least in this case, these groupers were trying to prey on the Nautilus, but you can see that really cool defense of closing that hood, sucking up in there, and then that grouper going away. So this is one of the first video records of actual predation on Nautilus. And it, it helps us learn about Nautilus, but it helps us learn about the deep sea, which we really know nothing about. I like to call this why you build your underwater traps with 2-inch rebar and weld it together. And that's at full speed, and that is a big shark. It's about a 2-meter long shark. It's about 300 meters. And the Nautilus are there just having a nice dinner of raw chicken necks. And this shark, for whatever reason, senses something there and just at the last second kind of pulls away, but definitely nails our expensive camera equipment. So it's one reason why we were thankful that we put all that investment into that really thick rebar. Side note, frustrating part about this is shark experts can't identify that shark. Which, as a non-shark expert, I think, well, you got everything there, but we don't even know what shark that is. So, kind of frustrating. From all that predation, we can see it in their shells. So their shells are, again, kind of a window into this deep sea. This is actually a live Nautilus that we caught in Australia. So part of our work, we're bringing these Nautiluses aboard research vessels and taking measurements. This is a huge shell break here. And what we think this black material is kind of like our scabs. Like when we get cut, we have a scab come over, and then eventually you might be left with a scar. So if we were able to catch this Nautilus in 10, 15 years once it heals, we don't know how long it takes them to heal, what will be left is most likely just a V scar. All this will be healed, and it'll look like pretty much a normal Nautilus. Now, the other thing we noticed in some of these Nautiluses are these tiny holes. And again, these are live Nautiluses that we caught in traps. And what we think these are octopus boreholes. So even though octopus and Nautilus are cousins, they don't mind eating their cousins, or at least trying to eat their cousins. But 50% of the Nautilus shells, or the live Nautiluses that we catch, have these octopus boreholes. So they might be a big prey item for octopus. So if Nautiluses disappear, what does that do to octopus as a big predator of Nautiluses? Now, this is lots of fancy stuff, but again, trying to hit home the point that Nautiluses are different than any other cephalopod. They're different than any other invertebrate. So when we think about them conservation-wise, our mind really needs to go to elephants, whales, large sharks, dolphins, because that's what they're more like physiologically. So Nautiluses don't have a larval phase, and a larval phase is important because that tiny larval phase can go to other places in the Indo-Pacific. Nautiluses lay this egg that looks like a barnacle. It's about the size of a quarter. They hide it in rocks. It takes a year to hatch in captivity. We don't know where they lay their eggs in the wild, another thing we don't know. So in the wild, it might take up to 2 or 3 years to hatch. And when it hatches out, I don't use this word often, so y'all are really lucky. It is really, really cute. It is a tiny, tiny Nautilus about the size of a dime with kind of bluish eyes, and really, really neat. So there's some cool work going on in different aquariums around the country and the world to try and raise them in captivity because nobody's gotten them past a year, unfortunately. But populations are fragmented, so they're not connected. You have one here, and because of those habitat constraints, they aren't going from island to island. There's no offspring dispersal where they hatch out. They go right to where the adults are. The adults don't go anywhere, and most of the time there aren't any new animals coming into those populations. So this is kind of setting up a series of events that if you fish this organism, you're likely going to see it decline quickly. And this is why Nautiluses are fished. So in 2010, there was a really cool article by the New York Times basically saying that we are loving Nautiluses to death. And it's not just the past 50 years, they've been around for a while, and it's only been in the past 50 years where we're really trying to fish them out, really trying to supply that worldwide demand for this really cool shell. And so the first data that we have on this, so you think of your bank account. You know, when you're taking money out, putting money in, usually you have some idea what's in there. Maybe you don't. When I was in college, I really didn't. Now I have some idea. Nautiluses are like the bank account that we have no idea what's going on. We're taking and taking and taking, and until recently, we didn't know anything. So these are lots and lots and lots of numbers. The two main countries that are fishing for nautiluses still are the Philippines and Indonesia. And this is over a 7 to 8 year period, so almost 800,000 pieces of nautiluses were being imported into the US. So it's good data, but it's also bad data because we don't know if it's an earring, if it's a necklace, or if it's the whole shell. But it's the best we have, and it's the first step towards conservation. If we look at some fishery surveys in the Philippines, look at the green, and that's going to be those gray bars. They're really high. So those black bars next to it are within 20 years of fishing in those areas. The amount of nautiluses they're catching per trap in the Philippines has significantly declined to the point that the fishermen aren't moving island to island, so they really lose out. The traders are moving from island to island and hiring new fishermen. So it's a lose-lose all around. And if we look at these two on the right, we don't see much difference, but the data we have from there is only from a couple years. So I would guarantee if we went back there now, those black bars would be down to where these black bars are. And again, the really, really crazy thing is this isn't hundreds or thousands or big ships fishing for these nautiluses. This is a handful of fishermen in every single location, just setting traps in the evening, picking them up in the morning, and just over time, collecting tens of thousands of nautiluses every single year in these really small locations. And it is a lot of money. So when we first went into this, you know, our idea of coming from the United States, we're not trying to stop anything. We're trying to help different places regulate their resources and help them manage things. But this was eye-opening to me, just how much money this actually is. So this is an important resource to them. So when you're thinking of conservation and regulations, you have to work with these families that are trying to simply feed their family. So that was kind of a big, big insight for me. So science, you obviously sometimes have really, really difficult questions. This was a simple question. In 2011, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service kind of asked us, how many nautiluses are left? How can we protect them? So we went to different places throughout the Indo-Pacific, started in the Philippines, but since we've been to Fiji, American Samoa, Palau, kind of all around. A few years ago, during this time, I was in American Samoa, and the temperature was about 82. Super nice, super nice. But you have to travel with all this gear. So this is Dr. Peter Ward. He's been my colleague and mentor through all this. And there's 3 of us here. We have about 20 bags of gear. And this is our hotel for the night / airport. So we got there a little early. This is in Samoa. And in the tropics, if you know anything about mosquitoes, those mosquitoes love to carry those nice viruses that like to hurt people. So we're trying to sleep in 85 degrees, trying to cover up, but also trying to be comfortable. But it's part of it all. I mean, it's the worst part of it all, because once you get there, it's really awesome. And this is, I don't want to be cheesy, but it is the coolest part, is working with local communities and just boring tasks of rolling rope up and down so we can do 50-minute marks. So we know when we're bringing this rope up, which you guys will get a chance to pull a rope up soon, we know there's only 100 meters to go. And these kids, there were 5 or 6 at a time, were fighting over helping to carry this around. And again, when you're working with the community, they're going to be more likely to invite you back, more likely to hear what you have to say, and it's just fun working with people. These are the traps that they use in the Philippines. Really nice design. They're made out of bamboo, really light. In the center, they put a little tiny piece of chicken. So this isn't a huge chicken. This is really just a chicken foot in some cases. So it also owes to the fact that nautiluses have that really big nose. They can sense these tiny, tiny things. They go into the trap, and they push these little things, and they can't get out. It's a really good design to catch nautilus. From that, we do a lot. What we're really interested in is how many nautiluses are they catching per trap today? So if we look at the Philippines 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they're catching about 1 per trap. And that's a modest estimate based on market surveys and what folks are telling us. If we compare that to some areas where they don't fish for nautiluses historically, it's pretty similar. So in the places we've been to the Philippines where they do still fish for nautiluses, even until this day, it takes a lot more traps to catch that one Nautilus. And if you're a fisherman in these areas, all that really means is you're working longer. Because you're not going to see this and move on to another organism. It just means you have to set more traps, you have to work for a couple more hours, and those Nautiluses disappear even quicker. So when we catch those Nautiluses, we do some other cool work with them. And this is just one of them, because we don't really know how Nautiluses utilize their habitat. So we attach these little transmitters, which if you put on a shark or a sea turtle, you don't even notice, but it's the same thing they use. Here it looks like a little battery cowboy right in the saddle, because that little battery is really heavy. So we have to make a saddle for it out of this white buoyancy stuff that offsets it, so that when we put it on this Nautilus and dive the Nautilus back down, it doesn't sink to 800 meters and 900 meters, and then the Nautilus dies. But this was in Papua New Guinea a couple of years ago. We were able to attach these to the fuzzy Nautilus, and we tracked these over 7 days in a little boat, seeing how they move vertically, seeing what the temperature is in the deep sea, seeing lots of different information about what's going on there. Another thing we're moving towards is the beta traps are great, but it means we have to take Nautiluses out of the population. When you're doing fishery work like that, anything you take out of the population, you just assume it's dead. We release everything. We've caught Nautiluses again, so we know our methods at least work for the ones we've caught. But we're moving towards this baited remote underwater video system. So it's this big rebar frame with a camera and an underwater housing here that can go down to about 1,000 meters. And then we have an LED light source here that we can use as white, red, or blue. White works the best for us, just to ID Nautiluses, but we've tried blue and red just to see what happens, and still the white seems to work the best. What you don't see here, which probably goes over here, is a bait stick with chicken. Now depending on where we go, sometimes we use fish, because in Fiji when we were there, the chicken was about $20 a pound. I don't know why, so we ended up using canned mackerel. All we're trying to do is draw Nautiluses to this bait stick, record it overnight for about 12 hours, and then we look and see what's there. Now the bummer part of this is it's not a live feed, so there has been 2 times where we put the camera in this housing, we turn it on, we say record, do all this stuff, go Cowboys, and anything else crazy out in the field. Sorry Vikings, but I shouldn't have said that yet. So now you'll feel good about this next part. So when we clicked that camera in on 2 occasions, it just shut the camera off. And we didn't know until we pulled it up the next day and saw nothing on it. So that was kind of a waste. But we could find lots of stuff out, especially when you have video. You can do so much. And we're even learning now that we can even do more and more and more and more and more. But what we're really interested in finding out is population abundance, or a number of Nautiluses in these areas. So we set it out at dusk. We wake up the next morning at dawn, go to pull it up. And at this point, I said you guys are going to help pull up the trap, right? So I think we need some exercise too. So if everyone wants to help me pull this trap up, we'll all do it, so we'll all look ridiculous. Sorry about the Vikings. I was rooting for them. So if we pull this up more and more and more and more and more, then you can be a Nautilus researcher. That's what it's all about. This was the very first trap that I ever pulled up, and I still remember it because it was in the Philippines in 2011. Our fishermen woke up before us and had already kind of started pulling it up, and I said, I have to be a part of this. So I get out of our tiny boat, swim, I'm going to say now 100 feet, it was probably 30, but 100 feet in open ocean sounds better. And I swam, crawled up on this thing. 45 minutes later, the stupid trap still wasn't up, and we're just going and going and going and going. But this is still the best way to pull it up. We've used mechanical winches and buoy systems in 2 boats. This is still the best way. And seeing it in action, don't get too excited. This is what it looks like. It's slow and steady wins the race. We do this several times a day, throughout the course of 7 to 14 days, depending on how long we're in a place. And we get the bruvs up, and the first thing with a guy your mentor, a guy you think really highly of, is to look in these cases and make sure there's no water flooded in those compartments, which we've never had. Very good cases. Anybody know what this gray stuff is? Duct tape. So we have all these different things to attach it there, and I don't think we need the duct tape, but the duct tape at the end just helps us sleep a little better at night. So we wrap all those in duct tape just in case. And when we notice that there's not any water there, that's when we can start to see what's on the video. I apologize for this first video. I'm going to let it play and see if it goes. This is from Australia. Hopefully what you get from here is a lot of Nautilus. There's never been a fishery there. There's been research there. There's a lot of stuff going on in Australia related to coral reefs bleaching and things. So we don't know how that affects Nautiluses, but lots of Nautiluses in Australia. If we move to other areas, again, we're here for the Nautilus. We're finding so many other cool things. There's deep sea sharks. There's those darn groupers again hanging out in Fiji. And this is our canned mackerel because it was cheaper than chicken. Sometimes our trap gets drugged, so currents do take it even though we weigh it down. And I put this in there because that is a cephalopod. It's called a bobtail squid. And I put that in because that was the last 30 seconds of a 13-hour clip that I was watching with nothing else on it. And so what happened is our trap did, this isn't like landing on the moon. I'd say this is, well, it's not harder, but it's kind of harder. So our trap is now pointed up, which is not good for the science part of it. But we still watch it to see these really cool moments. But this was really, really boring. And at the end, this little bobtail squid just happens to go through, and at least it made it all worth it. So moving to American Samoa, this was one of the smallest Nautiluses we've recorded. So it's one of the things that makes us think once they hatch, they go straight to where the adults are. So you have juveniles living next to adults. These are two Nautiluses mating. There's big sharks in the background. And this big black thing that's covering everything up, we think is ink from some big cephalopod. But the really unique thing here is that Nautiluses have that big nose, but they must know, hey, it's not a threat, or I don't care, I'm still going to try and mate, even if it is a threat. So these two Nautiluses are mating. This one's trying to fend off one of them, and they just kind of go off. Nautiluses, when they come to our nice meal of chicken or fish, they eat, and since they are solitary, they don't run into a lot of other Nautiluses. So if you come next to food and there's other Nautiluses, if you're a male, you try anybody. Eventually it'll work. The unique thing is females, if they come next to other females, they are repelled away. So there's something there telling that females either don't want to be near females, or probably we don't want to lay eggs near other females. Vanuatu was a little different, very different place, but there were some squid. It was a lot shallower. Vanuatu is a strange place because the cold water is really shallow, so at night, when the Nautiluses come up, you can actually dive with them if you're lucky enough. You also have to dive with tiger sharks in that area, which can be a little bit iffy. But Papua New Guinea was probably the coolest place. This is one of those videos, again, that points up. Papua New Guinea was really, really rocky. The bottom is just jagged rocks, jagged rocks, jagged rocks. But lots of cool, cool animals. Cool sharks with dorsal fins way back here. This is one of the only places in the world that has the regular Nautilus, and it also has that fuzzy Nautilus right here. So in 2015, we were going back to really see if the fuzzy Nautilus was still there. And fortunately, it's still there. And it's really, really rare. If we see 10 or 15 regular Nautiluses, we only see about one of those per those 10 or 15. And when we go to the Philippines, we see totally different animals, but we see an area kind of devoid of Nautiluses. We see big urchins, unique jellyfish that we aren't sure of the species, different deep sea fishes, but we just don't see any Nautiluses. And the ecosystem here should be pretty similar to other ones around the Indo-Pacific. We also know Philippines is really heavily fished for sharks and other organisms. So is that pressure from fisheries changing this whole ecosystem? Yeah, that's stupid shrimp. You love when that happens. But this is what we see. One Nautilus here, one Nautilus there. Over 600 hours of video from the Philippines, we've counted 6 total Nautiluses. And when we go to Palau here in a little bit, we'll see up to 9 just in one night. The other unique thing about this is I would think if I'm a Nautilus and I have chicken or shrimp I'm going to go for the shrimp. Because even though they don't have suckers, they have glue on all those tentacles. So you stick a couple tentacles out, you get that live shrimp, and then you scurry off. But they don't seem to care. They really want that decaying meat. So you ask the question, are they scavengers? Are they active predators? Are they both? From here, it looks like they're just scavengers eating dead food. And the fun part of writing papers. So from all that, we do calculations and we make numbers. And in the Philippines, there's 0.02, 0.03-ish nautiluses per kilometer squared, which for scientific purposes is significantly different than other places we've been. But the really unique thing to us is that all of these 4 bottom places were really, really small. That top place we think is an outlier. It's in the middle of the Coral Sea and the Great Barrier Reef where it's not really likely to have nautiluses. So we include it here, but we think this is more of the norm. So even areas that aren't experiencing fisheries are low and could be susceptible to fisheries, but also climate change effects, anything else like that that might be going on. So from this initial stuff, other factors that might be playing a role, sedimentation. If nautiluses are digging in that sand, and as we move more and more people to the coastal waters and we're dumping more and more nutrients into there and potentially toxins, as they're digging through that sand, they might be taking those toxins up. And they're really sensitive to things like that. Their skin is just made up of tiny pores, no scales, no cover. So if you're getting toxins in the water, that can cause issues. There's also some deep sea mining by a company called Nautilus, which is so weird. It's starting in Papua New Guinea. If you didn't know about it, it's going. Deep sea mining is happening. And you know, they are supposed to be environmentally friendly. And we won't know until they start, but I think the important thing is that there's very little baseline data anywhere in the Indo-Pacific of the depths that they're going to be mining, which is between 400 and 700 meters. There's also other fisheries that might be catching nautiluses. So lots of things that might be impacting the populations, but from what we see, the fisheries and the fishermen, the traders are going to be the greatest impact. And all these populations are small, and there is one that we know is gone. So there's an island in the Philippines called Siquijor, which had the smallest nautilus. It's about the size of your fist. And we went back there a couple years ago. We didn't record any on the video. We didn't catch any traps. So there still might be some there. At least we didn't see it in our data. So we're calling that population effectively extinct. The deep sea is a lot cooler than I ever thought it would be. So we're discovering so much more. We're building partnerships and collaborations with more and more folks to learn more and more. All the populations are different, the genetics are different, and the big question I get after this is, well, let's reproduce them in captivity, which we've already kind of talked about. But remember this, really slow growing. So if you start this, you've got to figure you're going to turn a profit in maybe 15 or 20 years. Because nautiluses don't become mature until about 12 or 15 years. They might live up to 100. We don't know how to age them after they stop growing. So we don't know what the nautilus's gray hairs or wrinkles are yet. We just know they stop growing, but then they still live. And there's not any published reports of nautiluses going past a year. That's that cute little guy about the size of a dime. And when they do grow, or when they do hatch, they are small. So you might have to wait 10 or 12, 15 years for them to reproduce. They're going to reproduce maybe 10 eggs. That take a year to hatch. And when they hatch out, you're waiting 12 to 15 years to get a market-sized shell that you'd want to sell. And the shell in captivity looks kind of funny. It doesn't appear to affect the nautilus in any kind of health way, but from what we know, it just looks bad. But if you're going to sell it, no one's probably going to want to buy that shell. So if you're thinking about, reproduction, aquaculture of nautiluses for this, there's so many things that are saying it's not going to work. So if we put all that together, put these 3 nautiluses here, this fuzzy nautilus here, and we think of all those fisheries and trade, and we think about the life history traits, then it's really not a surprise, and it wasn't a surprise to us that they're all disappearing and that some populations are already extinct. So then from here you try and develop solutions, and solutions, and solutions. And there's 3 major things. So CITES, this top one in the green, is the organization that regulates trade of endangered species. So think rhino horn, certain seahorses, shark fins, things like that. The IUCN in red list, what it does is says this species is kind of threatened, this species is not threatened. So it kind of gives you guidance. And the Endangered Species Act of the United States is a federal law that enacts regulations and protections for organisms that the U.S. has in its territory that it thinks are either threatened or endangered. So in order to decide how to go forward with this, you have lots of workshops. And these are the two major government organizations we're working with, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And this was actually a really good workshop. I didn't think it would be because of the government stuff, but it was run really, really well. 3 days, we got a lot done. And so from here in 2014, we decided, well, we still needed more data. So part of the thing is, we know there's an issue. We can see it. But we still need more scientific data so that when we go for a proposal to the world to say, hey, we need to stop doing what we're doing with nautiluses, there's enough data to support it and they buy into what we're trying to say. The first proposal that was put out was through the Endangered Species Act to list Nautilus pompilius, the species, on it. And just get to the point recently. So right now, the Nautilus pompilius species, that one that does not have the fuzziness on it, is going to be listed as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. The way that the United States gets involved is because American Samoa is a U.S. territory, and it has nautiluses there. So it seems like kind of a back way loophole, but I think it's going to be really effective, and that's supposed to go in place within the next year. This whole process has taken 4 years. I've learned a lot about conservation policy, which is actually really interesting. The thing that we did before that, which was a little quicker, was this CITES thing. That again is 182 countries or so that say, hey, we need to do something different. We agree with the outcomes, and we're going to enforce these rules that we make. So before that, you also have a meeting. One of the coolest parts about this work is you get to travel to really cool places. So in 2016, there was a meeting in June in Rome at the Food and Agricultural Organization. It's kind of a pre-proposal meeting. So it's a meeting where myself and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife person go propose this to save the Nautilus. And these experts from all over the world who aren't Nautilus experts grill you. It is really tough because they really want to look at the data, and they are really hard, which I respect because we want to put the good data forward. And to forget about all that, I at least got to walk by the Coliseum to work every single day, which was neat. It's one of those side things that, I hope people take advantage of. So at the CITES, which was in South Africa about 1.5 years ago, this is what CITES says. But if we start kind of breaking it down, there are some good things in there. Regulations, environment, benefits, people, sustainable, legal, traceable. So there's some good stuff. There's a good framework there. It's just how do you enact it? How do you enforce that? How do you make folks aware of it? So at CITES, we were successful. Long story short, we proposed it. All the countries voted to, yes, we want to put this under this Appendix 2. And all these different countries were incremental in writing the proposal, supporting the proposal. So now nautiluses, the trade isn't stopped. What it says now is that if you're going to trade nautiluses, you need a permit to show that you're doing some kind of research to help with population surveys. So just like any fishery, that you're collecting data on this fishery to see if it's going down, see if it's staying steady, or see if it's going up. So again, it just regulates that trade. So if we look back at this, awesome, we think it's all there, but again, how do you really make that happen? We go back to the vaquita. So the vaquita and this totawaba have been on CITES Appendix 1, which basically says no trade, you can't do anything with these animals, since the 70s. And the vaquita is effectively extinct now. So it's gone. The reason it's gone is because folks are fishing for this totawaba for its swim bladder, which sells for almost $10,000 per kilogram in Asia. And these are just being caught as bycatch. I think that's the worst part of it all, is this little porpoise that until recently nobody had ever seen alive is just gone as just a bycatch animal. So it shows you that CITES is not the only solution. It's maybe the first step. So the second step is to go back out there, continue doing what we're doing. As weird as it sounds, just to keep doing the surveys, that's what we have to do. Because we have some good stuff, we've been to lots of different areas, but there's also areas where we don't know what's going on with nautilus populations. We haven't talked to the fishermen, we haven't talked to the community. And these areas within those areas where, again, we still haven't had that impact. So recently, this past summer, we started implementing what this CITES meant. So all these regulations went in place in January 2017. Now how do you get that information to the folks who need it? So in Fiji, we've been there a couple times and we've developed relationships with different groups. This is at a Sunday school for kids in Fiji, and there we were talking about the environment and nautiluses and how the ocean is important to them. And just this little thing, they all have a nautilus sticker, of course, which some of you all do as well, I hope. And it really is what it is. It's talking to those people. And it's hard to get to Fiji, but whenever we do our work, one of our main components to it is doing this outreach there. So yeah, we're doing all this work, but then we go into the community and let them know what we're doing, show them the videos, talk to them about what CITES means, what conservation means. So from there we went to Samoa. Samoa is an interesting country because they don't know if they have nautiluses, but they want to see if they do, so that they can support CITES and they can support the group globally. So we didn't catch any there, it's kind of a bummer, but they're really excited about having us back and working with us and hopefully figuring out a way where we don't go back, they take ownership over, they take control, and they do the surveys going forward. And the big one recently was Palau. Palau is an interesting area where we know there's lots of nautiluses, at least we think there are. They aren't historically fished, and we weren't sure how many were left from data from just 30 years ago. But this gives you an idea of some of the habitat we're looking at. So that's where we're trying to land really flat on the bottom to get a really good video. Palau is really, really rocky, and you see lots and lots of different organisms. So here is this little thing here. Anybody guess what that is? It is a swimming sea cucumber. So some sea cucumbers are able to just move their body like that and just swim around. So it is all about the nautilus, but it's also not all about the nautilus, which is really cool. So in Palau, no kidding, the first night, this is within a half hour, there's already a nautilus there. It finds our chicken and it goes to town. So we know this is already going to be good. Lots of nautiluses there. Up to 4 here. You can see this one's trying to mate. You can see there's a big oil fish here. It's about 2 meters. The locals call it an oil fish because it's a really, really oily fish. You can't eat it. It's just way too oily to eat. We get more nautiluses here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you get the celebrity nautiluses that like to just really pop up. And it's nice when they do that. It's not so nice when they stick onto the camera with all their tentacles and just ruin 12 hours of footage. But, so a couple more, they come and go. And we see some really big sharks. This is a 6-gill shark, which is found around the world. Probably about 3 meters, maybe about 10 feet or so. Right now it's trekking shallow, more shallow. And about 10 minutes later, in the opposite direction, a different type of shark comes right by. So this is a small-toothed sand tiger shark. It's kind of related to sand tiger sharks that are found on the Atlantic coast. That's only found in the Indo-Pacific. But those big things must have crossed paths, and they were about the same size. They just kept going. But those are potential predators that at least are checking out what's going on here, not going after the nautilus. Sometimes, well not sometimes, all the time in the oceans there are tides, there are currents, there's stuff going into the water, so we don't always get the clearest picture of what's going on. There's lots of shrimp, but all this detritus and organic materials really kind of screws with some of our video. And these last clips are just snapshots of some of this video because we're still working on getting it, but I mentioned that we think nautiluses now just eat dead food. Well, that's wrong. So here in the Palau, we have this nautilus here. What's under here is a big crab. And we didn't really know what was happening at first. And the nautilus starts to attach to this crab. So we don't know if it's eating it. I guess it could be laying an egg on it, which maybe nautiluses lay eggs on big crabs like that. So it's a moving thing. It's not going to be in one place. I just thought of that, so maybe that's the reason. But maybe it's also eating it. Whatever it's doing, the crab eventually has had enough. It kind of flips over, the nautilus falls off. You can see the nautilus in its defense position, but now you can see how big this crab is compared to that little tiny nautilus. So whatever it was doing, it was a behavior that we hadn't seen before, that we don't fully understand. We know nautiluses need calcium in their shell and different things. We know they eat lobster molts. In captivity, we feed them crab molts, so Kind of makes sense, but again, you don't want to go too far with some of these things. So I'd love to jump to that conclusion that it just laid an egg on there. But we'll never know just from that. Again, we have two mating nautiluses. I think this is a better picture because what they're doing is they're tentacle to tentacle. The male has 3 to 4 tentacles that are fused in something called a spadix. And that spadix is transferring a spermatophore, which is a packet of sperm, into the female. Now we don't know if the female can take multiple spermatophores and choose which one. Certain cuttlefish can. And if you're an animal that doesn't find mates much, it probably makes sense that if you get one, you can kind of hold off to see if something better comes around. Because if you only see one and it's the one you don't really want to use it. But again, it's something we don't know, but it's something we can look at in the lab. This is another tiny nautilus, another one of the smallest ones, but again, the juveniles are living right next to the adults, which helps us understand how the ecosystem is working down there. And on here, we can count on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we don't know if there's others off video. We assume they're not because they really want that bait. But the really great thing, thankfully for nautiluses, is that even though their patterns look kind of similar, it's just like a fingerprint. So as long as we can get a side view of one of them, we use a program that zebra researchers use to analyze that pattern and to tell us that it's different. Because our eyes are good, we can identify those are 9 different ones because there's 9 on the screen, I can count even. But we use this software to really, really identify it. So from Palau, there's lots of nautiluses there, and we've recorded 2 new behaviors, that nautilus and the crab, but also this potential courtship behavior. This is a male, we think it's a male, that would go from nautilus to nautilus and kind of curl up its tentacles on the shell. And it would do this over and over. Sometimes it would mate with one, or at least try to mate, sometimes it wouldn't. So is there something it's telling the other nautilus that, hey, my tentacles are curled, I'm ready? Or is it something it's sensing on the shell that it can tell male versus female? It's the only place we've seen it, but we see it just hours and hours and hours. So this is something we can look at in the lab in places where nautiluses are trying to bred, where they are mating and laying eggs, and see if they see the same things. So related to all this, we're starting this Nautilus Strong initiative, which is really trying to connect zoos and aquariums with the field work, just as good as Minnesota Zoo is doing. They've been, pretty much our strongest supporter throughout all these years of, figuring out what does that mean with that behavior there? Can we test that behavior in a lab and use it to help us with the field studies? So these are 3 nautiluses in our lab down in Des Moines, Iowa. The students there, the high school students, get to work with nautiluses, and we had just fed it a crab molt, so they were chowing down on that. But really trying to connect that lab and field work and connect everyone better, connect everyone a little better. So this is that group that Save the Nautilus group with, they're now, I guess, my 2 16-year-old bosses, 17-year-old bosses. But they came to American Samoa with us, which was really cool. And the last day they were there, fortunately, we were able to catch a couple nautiluses. So again, if you could have this picture with everybody, I think we'd be set for animals everywhere of being able to protect them and, not just fish them out to extinction. But that's really hard to do. But they're great stewards. They talk to their schools. They talk around the country. They did a video presentation to the world at the CITES conference in South Africa. So they're talking to the world, which is super cool. And when we had nautiluses, when we first got them in Des Moines, Iowa, we didn't even stage these. I was just there taking pictures, and this is what the impact was. So you can see it, and when you get folks to buy into nautilus or buy into polar bears or anything, I think you can see that they're going to buy into other conservation things and realize that all these animals have a place in the ecosystem, whether or not we know it or not. And I mentioned outreach. We do it. You can say it, but we try and visit as many schools as we can. This is an American Samoa, a very westernized school, electricity everywhere. And if you go to Fiji, no outlets, the beach is right there, but they don't really swim. They aren't really big fishermen, so they don't really know what's down there. So we were able to show them videos that we had just collected the night before on our computers, and they were able to see what's in their ecosystem for the first time. And we do a lot of stuff back here. best questions I've ever got, no offense if you have questions, are from 3rd and 4th graders. It blew me away. I had to kind of take a breath and make sure I could answer it correctly. We do a lot of traveling throughout the US, wherever I'm at, again, just trying to get that message across. And you get things like this, who's a Nautilus girl, which Halloween's 9 months away, so y'all can be Nautiluses. Coolest costume. She wasn't even collecting candy. She was handing out these little flyers she made about the Nautilus and talking to people. So it's so awesome. So these are the students, you know, as a teacher also of high school kids, you know, you want to support all students. And students like her, you know, we send her lots of books, lots of stuff. And this is at an aquarium in Dallas, where she's just talking to these guests, just out of nowhere. She was there with her mom, and they were at the Nautilus exhibit here, and she just started telling them about Nautilus. And that is what you want. So it's so awesome. So if you don't have that, you know, how do you really get a way forward? You know, CITES is great, Endangered Species Act is great, laws are great. But if you don't have that Nautilus girl doing that, then you're really not going to be effective. So we know Nautiluses are disappearing. So if they continue to disappear, fisherman loses out. Again, the trader probably just moves somewhere else, or they're rich enough that it probably doesn't matter to them. The ecosystem loses. So whenever you lose a species in any ecosystem, that whole environment loses that genetic diversity that allows it to respond to anything, to fisheries, to climate change, predators, all these different things. You lose a complex animal. You know, we like to think of octopus as smart. Nautiluses have complex behaviors, so the more we learn about them, the more we realize, hey, they can learn and remember things. And when we teach it where this thing is, and we move it around in that maze, they're able to find it again. And you might lose an indicator species. So if you want to drop back to helping humans out, you know, when we're tracking Nautiluses with that little battery type thing on the shell, that tracks temperature. It tracks dissolved oxygen in the deep sea, which is an area that, you know, we don't really do a lot with. We do stuff with coral reefs, great, but the deep sea we don't know too much. And we lose 500 million years in about 50 years. And so it goes for Vonnegut fans. So this is our Nautilus tank here. This was my PhD gift to myself. And again, we're just trying to get the message, because I think Nautiluses are the most well-known mysterious animal out there. You know, most of us have seen the shell or the design somewhere, but to know that it's an animal down there, that its animal group has been around for almost 500 million years, and just in 50 years it's declining, it's kind of bad. And this was another one of those videos that wasn't very good, but before it comes in, any guesses on what that is? Shark's a good guess. So this is a mola, whoever said that, yeah. So this is a sunfish, estimated, and it's a stupid sunfish for doing this. So we estimated at maybe 1.5 meters, big sunfish. They don't usually go this deep. So this was another cool thing that, you know, we're looking at Nautilus, but we have this really cool thing, and throughout the next 2 or 3 hours, that sunfish is going back and forth. And the Nautilus comes back, fortunately. So, of course, you know, you have a lot of funders for all this. Ironically, the zoos and aquariums that have funded this don't even have Nautilus. And I think that shows to those institutions how much they really support conservation efforts across the globe and for species that they don't even have. So especially, you know, the Minnesota Zoo and Becky for really championing this, and all these places. You know, it takes a lot to travel to these places. And thank you all for coming. I have no idea what time it is, but if anyone has questions or we have time for questions, I'm happy to take them. Thanks. Yes. Yeah, I love questions. Yeah.
Ecotourism an option for helping with the Nautilus?
That's a great question, actually. So in Palau, one of the reasons we were going there is because they have an ecotourism type thing where they catch the Nautiluses, they bring them shallow, and you can dive with them. The thing with that is we don't know how they're released, so we take extra care to release them. They can't really be up in the water too long because it's too warm. And so we don't really know what's going on with it. So I think it could be, but again, if it's managed and done well. You can catch them, you can release them just fine. But Palau recently just stopped all Nautilus fishing, so that ecotourism they were doing is stopped for now until they figure out a better way to do it, a better way to do a fishery. Yes?
I have 2 questions. The first is, how much are you trying to raise for each trip?
That's a good question. Each trip, if we piggyback them, each trip is about 10 to 15 grand or so.
Second question
Yes.
is, oh, sorry.
Could you repeat the question? 'Cause I'm not
Yes, I was told to do that, and I didn't. I apologize. So the question was about how much is each trip, and what we try and do is piggyback them. So we'll go to the Philippines and Fiji, and that would be 10 to 15 grand or so. Other places like Australia, which is very expensive, are almost double that. So we try when we go out there to go as many places as we can, because the airfare is really the biggest thing.
My other question was, you showed statistics on import to the United States. Is your assumption, or do you have data on, or is the United States the largest importer?
So the question was, is the United States the largest importer of Nautiluses? We think it's near the top. There's not any information as of yet from Asia. We know they get imported into Europe. We know Africa. There's just not as good data on that, but we assume the United States is near the top, if not the top. Yeah?
The small holes on the shells, you're showing that 2 Nautilus kind of piggyback. Could they be drilling into each other's shells?
So the question was, the holes on the Nautilus shells, could they be from other Nautiluses? Based on everything we've looked at in captivity, we don't see that. We see when they're mating or doing things that they will nip at kind of the edge of the shell, and that's kind of a telltale sign. From what we understand about the Nautilus, they aren't able to use their radula to drill. Like octopus are able to use their radula to drill oysters and different things in other places. So we have that kind of proxy that octopus can do this with other animals, and from that it looks like an octopus borehole. Yes?
Is it possible that nautili are is it possible to suck them out of their shell, like a predator?
So the question is it possible to suck the Nautilus out of their shell? I would say it's possible. They have really big adductor muscles which hold that Nautilus in. So what we think is happening with those octopus boreholes is they're drilling them at the point in the shell where they can then secrete a venom and digestive enzymes that break down that muscle. And once they break down that muscle, then it's going to be a lot easier to get to that actual Nautilus. So it's probably possible, and if that happens, the Nautilus dies. So the way Nautiluses are fished and the way they get the shell is very similar to shark finning, where the fins are just chopped off and the living shark is just kind of tossed overboard. So the Nautilus is just ripped out of its shell, it's tossed over, and the shell is saved, so it's not able to live without the shell. But a big enough octopus could probably have enough leverage and grip to rip it out. Yeah. Oh.
The Totoaba?
Yes.
What is it's the swim bladder?
It's a swim bladder.
What do they use that?
I believe it's for a type of medicine. It's not a food. I believe it's for a type of herb for some type of medicine. Sorry. Darn. The question was, what is a Totoaba swim bladder used for? I think it's for Eastern medicine, something like that. Yes?
Do starfish prey on them? You know, starfish will tear open a shell with all those little suckers, like saw one. Would starfish prey on Nautilus?
Right. So the question is, do starfish prey on Nautilus? And we don't know. It's possible that they do. Nautilus do have parts where we do track them. They have up to 2 to 3 hours where they are sedentary or stationary. And we think what's happening when they do that in that resting period is as they go deep, there's more and more pressure on that shell. So there's more and more pressure on that animal to keep water out. But eventually water's going to seep in, they're going to become a little negatively buoyant. So to adjust that, we think they'll find a crevice or something. We know they're stopped because they stay at 250 meters for 3 hours. So we know they're not moving. So if they're stopped right there, they're going to be more susceptible to predation, which they might be susceptible to a big starfish or something. But we just don't know. We've never seen it on video. We see very few starfish down there. We saw the one in the Philippines. So it's a potential for sure. Yeah.
So what is the ecological impact of Nautilus?
And that is the one question that has been so hard to answer, but we're getting better at it. So Nautiluses are a group of organisms that we don't really think too much about, scavengers. So the Nautiluses are the biggest scavenger in the deep sea that we think. And scavengers are important because what they're really doing is they're getting all those end products of energy, whether it's dead food, whether it's smaller things, back up the food chain. So without all those scavengers, without those crabs, without those shrimp, without those Nautiluses, all that energy is just lost to the ocean. So we think they're an important scavenger, and that would be their role, is transitioning energy back up when they get eaten. I didn't say the question. The question was the role of the Nautiluses in the ecosystem. I apologize. I especially apologize to you for asking. Yes?
You say the Nautilus are not migratory, but in time is it possible to rebuild a population by human beings moving from one environment to another?
So the question is, if Nautiluses aren't migratory in time, can humans rebuild populations? Similar to what some groups are doing with corals, can we put Nautiluses here and somewhere else? It's possible, but the more we're learning about their behaviors, the more different they are. And so we really, really want to know more about that new ecosystem, what's down there, what predators are down there, how related the Nautilus populations are, because if there's different genetics here and different genetics here, we don't really want to mix them if they're not going to breed and reproduce. So there's a potential to it, but we really don't know what's going on with those habitats to do it like we would forests or things like that.
They have evolved differently than in the different habitats.
Yeah, and when I say that they aren't migratory, certainly some of them are. There's going to be one that, beats the odds and gets across that island. That's how they're found in all these different islands. But they've adapted right now to each island so differently that moving them would be probably pretty difficult. Do you have a question?
Yeah, if adult Nautiluses can survive in captivity, do you have theories as to why the younger ones that are born are not surviving?
So the question is, if adult Nautiluses survive in captivity, do I have any ideas why the younger ones are? Yes, I think we baby them too much. Nautiluses are pretty sensitive, but if they're, where we think they hatch out in the wild is at about 150 meters. That's still pretty cold. It's shallow for Nautiluses, but it's still pretty cold. And most of the hatchling Nautiluses that have been hatched in captivity and tried to raise have been raised in warm waters, thinking that increases growth rates. And another potential to this is at 150 meters where they hatch, at 300 meters where they live, there's a lot of atmospheric pressure. And so for an animal like the Nautilus that has to make a calcium carbonate shell, it's going to take a long time to do that. So in captivity, when they're basically at 1 atmosphere of pressure, I think their physiology is just all wrong, and they're trying to grow too fast for themselves. So they're really trying to lay that shell down, and just internally, physiologically, somatically, they're just not growing quick enough. But we're starting to look at some of that and answer some of those questions with the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have some Nautilus hatchlings now, and I think they have about 7. So we're starting to actually do some things with them and really look and see, what is going on with them, what is the variable stopping us from getting them past that year, which is still really rare. Usually it's 2 weeks and they're dead. Yes?
Just this weekend I saw a TV show on PBS with Nautiluses, and they were propelling themselves forward, so they really couldn't see where they were going from the position of their eyes, and they kept
Probably not. So the question is, if Nautilus is moving shell first and banging into things, is it damaging the shell? From what we see in captivity and from what we see with Nautilus banging around down there, there's no impact on the shell. It's about 5 millimeters thick. It's a really, really thick shell, and that outer part is really, really strong, the periostracum. So it's not really until you have a predator breaking that, and we don't know what predator, again, is making those big things. It's not until something's kind of physically acting on it that's breaking it to cause that. But if they did, it would be awesome. And they could just bang around down there, and then they wouldn't want the shells anymore. Yes?
How did you end up as a Nautilus expert?
That's a good question. So I wanted to always study giant squid, and that's what I wanted to do since I was 4 or 5. And in 2006, I went to a conference, and some Nautilus expert was just talking about everything we didn't know. And I said, well, I'm young and stupid, I'm going to answer that question right away. And the big question was why they get those black lines in captivity. So I thought, okay, if their shell's made up of calcium carbonate, if we give them calcium carbonate, that shell's just going to go like that. So I used these pills we gave to penguins at the aquarium I was working at, and I just gut-loaded them with calcium carbonate, studied this for about 18 months. This involved every week taking pictures of each side, monitoring their feeding, keeping them alive. Just keeping them alive in captivity can be really hard because they're really susceptible to water quality, and so that's hard enough. And then at 18 months, I looked at all the data and didn't see any change. So, but ever since then, I was kind of hooked on them, and I've never kind of looked back. And now I'm kind of turning towards other stuff. The more we do in the deep sea, the more animals we see down there. So you kind of have to be an expert on more than just the Nautilus and start learning about what those stupid sharks are that come in too quick, and what all those sea urchins are and things down there. But it was just from hearing somebody say, we don't know about this, and I just went and tried, and it's been awesome ever since. Yeah?
So you mentioned a couple of species that we weren't expecting to see at certain depths. Were there any major surprises, like a species that, not that they thought was extinct, but was threatened or something like that?
So the question was, have we seen any species deeper that kind of surprised us because maybe they thought populations were low or extinct? And in the Philippines, when we saw some big sharks down there, that was surprising because we know there's heavy shark fisheries all throughout the Philippines. And we hadn't seen any big things. Not that I'm not at all afraid of sharks in the water, but when we saw the first shark at 300 meters, we thought, oh, well, there are sharks still here. Maybe they're all deeper now, and it's a different species. So that was kind of enlightening. And also in the Philippines, we recorded a 7-armed octopus. And it still has 8 arms, but its 8th arm is kind of short. So the first person that found it, counted the arms, counted 7-armed octopus, and now we call it that forever. But it's about 1.5 meters, and it just kind of slowly comes from out of the distance, and it's such a good shot. It just hangs out right by the video camera, comes back, and it's pink, purplish, and that's a pretty rare sighting from what I understand of seeing those anywhere throughout the world. And the last thing I think is seeing black tip sharks in Papua New Guinea down to 250 meters. Usually they're going to be more reef dwellers, and we don't know if we drew them down there. So it's one of those things that you want to say, oh, cool, 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 but there obviously is a bias that we're putting out this scent is bringing animals, those animals are bringing other animals. So, but it was pretty neat seeing some of these reef sharks down to 250 meters or so, 300 meters. Any other questions? Cool, so last thing I want to say, if somebody has one of those stickers and it says Nautilus in red on the back of it, if before you leave, there's a prize for you. And if it's one of the persons that left, we'll just do a trivia thing. But if y'all do have questions, I'll still be here. Feel free to come on down. And thank you all for showing up tonight. It was great, and thanks for supporting the zoo and Nautilus. So.
And I would like to invite all of you back next month. You can see on the screen that the next speaker series is on March 23rd, and we're going to be talking about human-wildlife conflict. So right now, we have speakers scheduled to come